There's no way. Look though, look. Players like this come around once, sometimes in our lifetime. There hasn't been
once in a generation, certainly.
But no player in NBA, in WNBA history, has had to deal with this.
The one thing I just don't like, and I don't care what people say, I feel like there's a lot of hate on Caitlin Clark, and I think because she's white.
There's a moment in every sport when something shifts. Not gradually, not over a season or a decade. It shifts in a single instant, the kind you feel before you can explain it. That moment in women's basketball had a name, Caitlin Clark. But here's what made it different from every other rising star story you've heard before. It wasn't just fans reacting. It wasn't just highlight channels or sports media chasing clicks. The people reacting were men who built professional basketball with their own hands.
Though, when legends criticize the league specifically instead than merely praising you, you can see that things has changed when legendary figures like Magic Barkley and Gervin intervene, supporting
Hall of Famers, champions, legends who had seen every kind of player imaginable across 4, 5, sometimes 6 decades of the game, and one by one they started talking about Caitlin Clark in ways they hadn't talked about anyone in a very long time. This isn't a story about compliments. Compliments are easy, PR teams write those. What these men offered was something rawer, something more uncomfortable, and ultimately something far more meaningful. They offered the truth as they saw it, the good, the complicated, and the parts nobody in the league wanted to say out loud. When legends speak without a script, you pay attention. This is what they said. Before the legends weighed in, there was already a tension building around the Caitlin Clark conversation that most mainstream sports coverage was carefully avoiding. Ratings were up. Attendance was up. Jersey sales were through the roof. Sponsors were paying attention to women's basketball in ways they never had before. By almost every measurable metric, the WNBA was experiencing a wave of growth directly tied to one player's presence. And yet that same player kept finding herself on the receiving end of hard fouls, late hits, and a strange institutional silence from the league itself. Veteran players made comments. Incidents happened on the court that would have triggered press releases and fines in any other context. But somehow with Caitlin Clark, there was mostly just a shrug. The fans noticed. The media danced around it, and eventually the legends couldn't stay quiet anymore. Teague isn't a media personality. He doesn't spend his time constructing careful talking points or thinking about how a quote will land on social media. He's a former NBA All-Star who played at the highest level, and when he talks basketball, he talks like someone who's earned the right to say exactly what he thinks. So when Teague addressed Caitlin Clark, he didn't offer a diplomatic take. He said what he actually believed, which turned out to be the most honest summary of the entire conversation. If she isn't playing, nobody is watching. Let that sit for a second. A man who played in NBA arenas packed with tens of thousands of people, a man who has watched the greatest players of his generation perform under pressure, was telling you flatly that one WNBA player is carrying the entire viewership of the league on her shoulders. He wasn't saying it to be provocative. He wasn't exaggerating for effect. He said it the way you say something when it's simply undeniably true, but Teague didn't stop there. He went further in a direction that nobody expected. 2 years into her professional career, Teague was already placing Caitlin Clark in the GOAT conversation. He compared her trajectory to LeBron James, not as hype, not as a hot take generated for engagement, but as a genuine basketball assessment from someone who has spent his entire adult life learning what greatness looks like up close. When a guy like Teague, known for being brutally honest rather than flattering, puts a player's name in a sentence next to LeBron, you stop what you're doing. That's not barbershop talk, that's a verdict. Michael Thompson has 2 NBA championship rings. He raised one of the greatest shooters the game has ever seen. He has spent decades around basketball royalty, on courts, in locker rooms, in practice facilities, in the middle of championship runs. He's a man who has stood next to greatness so many times that it doesn't faze him. And then Caitlin Clark walked past him in a loading dock in Indianapolis and he froze. He couldn't say hello. He stood there while his favorite basketball player outside of his own son walked right by and he didn't say a word. He brought it up later not as a funny story, but with genuine reverence, the kind that only comes from being in the presence of someone whose aura actually reaches you before they do. Think about what that means. This man did not freeze around Michael Jordan. He did not lose his composure around Magic Johnson, but Caitlin Clark walking past him in a hallway stopped him cold. That's not a compliment. That's a statement about what she represents in the cultural fabric of the sport right now.
When I was in Indy, I didn't care about that. The only thing I remember about Indy is when I was leaving Cambridge Arena in a loading dock, Caitlin Clark walked right by me, and I froze. I didn't say hello to her. How about that? My favorite basketball player outside of Clay was right there in front of me. There she was, and I said, no, I can't do it. But getting back to your question, you're right. That's what I remember most about Indiana. Caitlin Clark was right there next to me.
It's a statement about the kind of force she has become, one that even the most seasoned basketball people feel in a way they can't fully explain. And when a man who nurtured one of the greatest shooters in NBA history tells you she's his favorite basketball player, that's not hyperbole. That's the kind of validation that doesn't need any decoration. Magic Johnson doesn't deal in softballs. He spent too many years being held to impossible standards himself to have patience for easy praise that means nothing. When Magic speaks about a player, he's giving you context, not a quote for your highlight reel. What he said about Caitlin Clark was both a compliment and a challenge, and if you only took it as one or the other, you missed the point entirely. Magic drew a direct parallel to his own entry into the NBA alongside Larry Bird. He acknowledged that when they arrived, they weren't the best players in the league. Not yet. They were the most popular, the most watched, the most talked about, but the best came later through years of work, adjustment, and competition against players who were determined to prove them wrong. He placed Caitlin in that exact same lineage. That's not a dismissal, that's an elevation. Magic wasn't saying she has limits.
They're going to be tested by these incredible women who've been in the league for a long time. Caitlin is the most popular WNBA player, but she's not the best at this time. Just like Larry and I were not the best when we entered the league. We became the best later on by our play. Caitlin still has to play great. Sure.
He was saying she has a path, the same path that two of the greatest players in basketball history walked, and what's at the end of that path is something no one in the WNBA has ever quite reached before. He was urging her to keep going, keep competing, keep earning it, because the stage is already hers. The crown is the next step. In the world of basketball, there is no higher framework to place someone inside. If Magic represented the measured, contextual response, Reggie Miller represented everything that the patient approach was leaving unaddressed. Reggie is one of the coldest performers in NBA history. He's also someone who has never had much patience for watching someone get treated unfairly while everyone around them looks the other way. When the subject of Caitlin Clark came up and someone referenced the idea that she needed to wait her turn, Reggie's response wasn't diplomatic. He pointed out sharply and without apology that the greatest players in basketball history, including Shaquille O'Neal, who had floated the wait your turn idea in the first place, never waited for anything. They arrived and they dominated and the league adjusted. That was always how it worked for the truly exceptional. What Reggie was expressing wasn't just a defense of Caitlin Clark.
Said he loved Caitlin Clark, but, quote, she needs to wait her turn. Do you agree with the idea that great players, no matter how great they are, need to wait their turn? This was from Ben.
Hey, first of all, let's start off with Shaq. You ain't wait your turn.
It was frustration on behalf of anyone who had watched the situation clearly. You have a player who is generating ratings, filling arenas, driving sponsorship conversations, and elevating the profile of the entire sport. And instead of protecting her, the league had largely stood aside while she absorbed hits that would have triggered immediate consequences for any other star in any other context. Reggie wasn't calling for special treatment. He was calling for basic consistency. And his patience for the league's silence had run completely out. Robert Horry is a 7-time champion who built a career on showing up in the biggest moments and delivering. When he said that no player in the history of either the NBA or the WNBA has had to deal with what Caitlin Clark has dealt with, there was a weight behind it that couldn't be manufactured. He wasn't being dramatic. He was documenting something historically unusual, a player who arrived in a league as its most popular figure before she had done anything professionally, and who had to immediately navigate not just the challenge of competing at the highest level, but the pressure of being both a symbol and a target simultaneously.
Players like this come around once, sometimes in our lifetime. There hasn't been
once in a generation, certainly.
But no player in NBA, in WNBA history has had to deal with this, right? What she's dealing with.
What?
Like,
what is she dealing with?
Fouling from day one already, but she's been crowned. I mean, she's already, nobody who was the face of the league in the first few years of the WNBA?
Paul Pierce added another dimension. Pierce knows what it's like to carry expectations that are too large for any one person to hold. He's lived in the spotlight and understood its cost. But when he looked at what Caitlin Clark was dealing with, the endorsement pressure, the constant media examination, the racial narratives layered on top of everything else, the locker room dynamics, and the league-studied silence, he said something that revealed just how unprecedented the situation really was. There was no precedent to reach for. That's what the hesitation in his voice meant. He was looking for a comparison and couldn't find one because what she was going through genuinely hadn't happened before at this scale, at this speed, to someone this new to the league. And then there was Kevin Garnett, who took the entire conversation somewhere else. KG didn't approach this with sympathy or frustration. He approached it with something closer to respect, the kind of hard respect that only comes from people who have experienced what it means to have a target on your back and refuse to flinch. He made the point that hatred at this level isn't an accident. It doesn't happen to irrelevant people. It happens to players who represent a genuine threat to the existing order economically, culturally, and
privilege too, though. It's a privilege, though. It's a privilege to be in a position where others are hating on you. And when others are hating on you, that means you're doing something right.
In KG's framework, the hate was confirmation. She was the real thing. He also made something else clear. The players delivering cheap shots and late fouls needed to face real consequences, not because Caitlin Clark was fragile, but because what they were doing was an embarrassment to the sport. When you benefit from someone's presence, when the flights get better, the TV contracts get bigger, the audiences grow, and then you try to physically intimidate that same person into leaving, you've lost the right to call yourself a professional. Rick Barry cut through all the emotional and cultural framing and went straight to the economic reality. He didn't need metaphors or comparisons to make his point. The numbers told the story plainly. Players were flying private now. They weren't doing that before Caitlin Clark arrived. They were on major television networks, reaching audiences that the WNBA had been chasing for 30 years but never quite caught. And the person responsible for that shift was also the person getting hit the hardest, most frequently, and with the least institutional response from the league that was collecting the revenue she was generating. Barry called it what it was: shameful. And he raised a question that the players' union should have been asking loudly. If Caitlin Clark is generating this level of economic lift for every player in the league, why isn't anyone fighting to protect her, and why isn't anyone acknowledging that the entire league needs to be invested in making sure this kind of talent is cultivated rather than driven out? George Gervin, the Iceman, went to an even bigger canvas. He compared Caitlin Clark to Tiger Woods, and it wasn't a casual analogy. He meant it in the specific structural sense, the way Tiger didn't just improve his own career but transformed the entire financial reality of professional golf. Prize money went up, sponsorships exploded, television contracts got renegotiated, fans who had never cared about golf started paying attention because there was something transcendent in what Tiger was doing that crossed all the usual boundaries of fandom. Gervin saw Caitlin doing the exact same thing for women's basketball. Lifting every boat, making the whole enterprise more valuable, changing what was possible. And then he said the part that nobody in the official channels wanted to acknowledge. He said there was hate directed at Caitlin Clark and that a significant part of it was racial. He didn't dress it up. He didn't hedge it with qualifications. He stated it plainly as something he observed and believed to be true. Matt Barnes built his entire career on being the person in the room willing to say what everyone else was carefully avoiding. When he analyzed Caitlin Clark's game, the way her presence on the court was opening up space for her teammates, the way players were running differently because they trusted she would find them, the way her vision was reshaping the pace and creativity of the offense around her, he was making a serious basketball argument about a genuinely elite playmaker. But then he went where Gervin had gone because he felt the same truth pressing against the conversation.
Think about it, y'all. We're dealing with imperfect people, and, when you look at it, they don't know the value that she's bringing for all of them. She bringing, they flying private planes now. They went flying private before she came. They on major networks now. They weren't doing that. See, she remind me of Tiger Woods for golf.
Yes.
He changed the paycheck.
Let that sink in. Tiger Woods for golf, Caitlin Clark for women's basketball, and Gervin wasn't done.
Why ain't somebody, unions, making this an issue for these girls to say, like, man, we need another Caitlin Clark if we gonna be able to get all these benefits because they didn't have it.
The hate had a racial component and nobody in a position of authority wanted to address it directly. Barnes addressed it directly. Isaiah Thomas completed the picture. Thomas, one of the most cerebral and selfless point guards in NBA history, broke down what made Caitlin Clark genuinely extraordinary from a pure basketball standpoint. She wasn't just a scorer. She wasn't just a shooter. She was reshaping how her team moved, how they thought, how they used the court. That's what elite playmakers do. They don't just make themselves better, they make the entire system smarter. Thomas has spent his entire basketball life understanding what that kind of player looks like, and he was telling you clearly and without qualification that Caitlin Clark was that player. What makes this conversation so significant isn't any single quote or any single Hall of Famer's take. It's the pattern. Across the full range of these voices, men from different eras, different backgrounds, different relationships to the game, there was a remarkable consistency in what they were seeing. A generational talent, an economic force, a cultural phenomenon operating without a true historical precedent. And a league that was, at best, slow to recognize what it had and at worst, actively allowing the environment around its most important player to remain hostile in ways it would never have tolerated for anyone else. Magic Johnson said she was walking the same path as Bird and himself. KG said the hate was proof she was already there. Gervin and Barry said she was the Tiger Woods of women's basketball. Teague said without her, nobody's watching. Thompson said he froze when she walked by.
I think she has the Tiger Woods effect, the way he put golf fans in a craze. Whether you're a golf fan or not, you tuned in and you wanted to learn about the game because he was so incredible. I think she has that effect.
These aren't casual comments. These are assessments from people who have spent their entire lives learning to distinguish between a good player and something genuinely rare. And what they were telling you in their different voices and with their different levels of comfort about the full picture was the same thing. Something was happening in women's basketball. something that doesn't come along every few years or every decade. Something that, if the people in charge had the wisdom to recognize it and the courage to protect it, had the potential to permanently change what professional women's basketball looked like in America. The legends had spoken. The question was whether anyone with actual power was listening.